As we pick up this morning, we have kind of broken this last chapter into three messages, but it's really the same post-resurrection appearance of Jesus Christ, right? He's got the miraculous catch of the fish. He's restored now, last week, Peter to leadership through a 3-round question and answer, and he also gave 3 commands to Peter. And as we looked at last time, it was a little uncomfortable. It was a little awkward conversation. Peter's like, I keep telling you the same thing. You keep asking me the same thing, right? And I think he gets his point across. I think Jesus is making the emphasis that he needs to make. And so Jesus has now recommissioned him. He's now cast, if you want to say it this way, he's cast the vision for what Peter needs to do going forward in his life. But now today we're going to learn that Jesus is now going to explain a little bit more to Peter about his life, and he's going to predict his death. And as you can imagine, if Jesus was talking to you and he predicted your death, you'd be like, wait a minute, like I got some questions, this is concerning. I've got some questions for you. Peter doesn't even get his questions asked because he gets distracted. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. Everything's really going well and his focus begins to wander. And that's why I've entitled the message, Distracted, this morning. And again, the application of this passage is right on the bottom shelf for every one of us. This is not hard. We don't have to think too hard. We can see it right out of the chute. And that is this: there is so much, if I could say this, false and unhealthy comparison that goes on in our world. And you can just let your mind wander. False and unhealthy comparison that goes on in our world. But even more tragic, there's false and unhealthy comparison that goes on in our church. Our church is, in the church of Jesus Christ in general. And there's too much faulty evaluation of one another. We attempt to understand what somebody else is thinking. Anybody been married knows that's a crazy road to go down. It's better just to ask somebody what they're thinking than to assume that you know. You just don't know. We assume motives. There's too much gawking around at other people to decide whether or not you're going to do something or not. Well, if so-and-so does this, then I'll do it. If so-and-so doesn't do that, then I won't do it. We literally are gawking around horizontally when we are designed to have our eyes fixed vertically. And this is what we're going to see here from Peter. In fact, there's a verse in 2 Corinthians 10. I referenced this last week, 2 Corinthians 10:12. This is Paul's version of this. He says, "For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they measuring themselves by themselves." In other words, maybe they're not focused here, but they're focused here. They're still horizontal. It's just going the opposite direction. And then comparing themselves among themselves, that's here, are not wise. That's not a skillful application of knowledge when all you do are constantly focused on yourself, evaluating yourself, or constantly comparing yourself to other people. It's not wise. And I love, I didn't love it at the time. My worst basketball practice of all time, I was a basketball player in high school. Just to give you an idea of the coach I had, he was a drill sergeant before I actually knew what drill sergeants were. When I saw a drill sergeant portrayed in a movie I was like, that's my basketball. That was my high school basketball coach. Like, this dude was a nut job. He was just crazy. And I remember my sophomore year in high school, he called me into the office. I had tried out for the team, and he was telling me I made the team. And he said, well, congratulations, you made the basketball team. And I said, man, I was so excited. I was like, yes, good. He says, also, congratulations, you made the cross-country track team. And I was like, man, I did not try out for that team. I hate running. That was not me. But he coached the cross-country track team, so he made every basketball player run cross-country track. That was the way he got us in shape. So needless to say, over the course of that semester, I was up at 5 a.m. going to cross-country meets every Saturday, which is like the worst thing you can do to a 16-year-old boy. Make him get up before, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So, but anyways, one basketball practice, we show up, and you can see these goggles on this guy, and what they do is they take your sight away from you, from your eye level down. Now, anybody that plays basketball knows why you would take that tool, right? Because when you play basketball, if you just dribble around with your head down, you can't see the basket, you can't see your players, you can't see anything, you can't see a defender coming your way. You have to learn in basketball to have a laser narrow focus. You have to learn in basketball to always be looking up. And so this was the hardest practice because in order to get the feel for it, you had to be bent over bouncing the ball. And I felt like an 80-year-old man after that practice. My back was sore, my legs were sore, everything, just to keep my focus, laser narrow focus. And in the Christian life, and for Peter here, what we're going to see, Jesus Christ wants to force our focus to him. There is one prize in the Christian life. It's not being better than your neighbor. It's not doing more than the person sitting next to you. It's not being a better this, a better that. That's a comparison level type of thinking, and we need to rid our thinking of it. There's one prize in the Christian life. It's him. That's where the prize is. He is the prize. And last time I checked, and I'll say this later in the message, when you appear before the judgment seat of Christ, guess who's going to be there? You and your prize. You and your prize, not the person sitting next to you. Not even your spouse. Not your children, not anybody, not your pastor. Nobody's going to be there but you and he. And so the message this morning for each one of us is don't get distracted. Like, why are we getting distracted? By the way, it'd be easy to understand if the prize was not worth looking at. If the prize was garbage, if the prize was a toy from Dollar Tree that's going to break in 5 minutes, if the prize was something that would perish. I tried the other day, I was going to surprise my wife and bring home a piece of chocolate from a restaurant I was at. But I figured by the time I got home, it's going to sit in the car, it's going to be melted. So I just ate it for her in memorandum for her. But that's not the prize we're looking at. It's not a piece of melted chocolate, it's Jesus Christ. What can be better than that? Who could be better than that to be occupied with on a day-by-day basis? This is what he's going to tell Peter. So let's jump in this morning. Let's cover verses 18 through 25. Verse 18, most assuredly, Jesus says, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. Now, before we go on, we have to understand that what is going on in this appearance between Peter and Jesus Christ, these other 6 disciples, was life-changing for Peter. Now, how can I say that? Well, I want to pull up something that Peter wrote 30 years after the story that we're looking at. This is 30 years later. And notice what Peter writes to other leaders, okay? In other words, notice what Peter got from Jesus, and notice what Peter now pushes downhill to the other leaders. He says in 1 Peter 5:1, the elders, again, other leaders, who are among you, I exhort. I, who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. Now what does Peter tell other elders to do? The same thing. He's literally bumping that instruction down to this next generation of leaders. Serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly. Not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. In fact, there were types of people in that culture that watched sheep out of compulsion, and they watched sheep for dishonest gain. Who were they called? They were the hirelings. They weren't the shepherds. And when the heat got turned up, they're like, here you go, wolf, you can have that sheep. I'm out of, let me just put the sheep in front of me to protect myself. He says, don't do that. Verse 3, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. And you see how Peter's been impacted by this event. So this was very impactful. I think this next section that we're looking at this morning is also equally impactful. Jesus starts off by saying most assuredly, or amen, amen. He did that a lot of times when he's trying to indicate that he's saying something super duper trustworthy. In other words, what he's about to say, you can take it to the bank. And what he tells him is this: when you were younger, you girded yourself and you walked where you wished. All of these verbs here, I've got them highlighted there in those yellow boxes. They're all imperfect tense verbs. What that tells us in the Greek language, it's ongoing action in the past. In other words, this is how Peter lived his life in the past. He kept on girding himself whenever he wanted to. He kept on walking wherever he wanted to. He continually, and he walked wherever he continually wished to walk. This is description, again, of Peter's life prior to becoming his disciple. And you might say that Peter was an independent free agent. You might say that Peter did what he wanted to do, and he didn't do what he didn't want to do, okay? And this is very clear regarding Peter's life going forward. And so Peter may have done things for others during this time. Apparently he did. I mean, he was married. He was, we learned from the Gospels that his mother-in-law lived with him, so he's caring for his mother-in-law. So there were things that he did for other people. But ultimately, Peter's life revolved around a 2-foot circle drawn around his own 2 feet. And that's about as far as he could see, was 2 feet in front of him, if you will. And see, life was about him. Life was about his purposes. Life was about his comfort. Life was about his goals. Life was about his enjoyments. And by the way, is this not the natural way to live? Isn't this, even as those that sit there this morning who have put your faith in Christ alone for salvation, isn't that a default way to live for you? Now, default and natural don't always mean the best, right? In fact, I would venture to say that if you live life that way, it is a miserable, not just a neutral, it is a miserable way to live. Because you are so far out of the design purpose of God for your life when you think that way, when you manage life that way, when you make decisions that way. And I want you to think about that for a second. How does any product that you buy in our culture work when it doesn't function according to the design? What if in your kitchen, let's just go to your kitchen, okay? What if your refrigerator one day just decided that they wanted to wash the dishes? Like, how would that work with the food that you've got in your refrigerator? What if the dishwasher one day decided it wanted to be the oven? Yeah, I mean, you would have a kiln in your house. You'd be baking clay pots, they'd be shattering everywhere. What if the vacuum cleaner decided it wanted to clean the swimming pool? Well, you wouldn't want to be too near that. You'd get electrocuted, right? So there's products that are designed for a certain purpose. And when you try to use them outside of their purpose, it doesn't go so well. We've got to make that application to our lives. The happiest, most fulfilled that you can ever feel in your life is when you are walking in the will of God for the design that he has for you. Not your neighbor. Don't try to be like your neighbor. Don't try to be like your neighbor at home or in here. Don't try to be like anybody else. What is God's design for you? That's the whole point. And so Peter he was just living. I don't think Jesus is criticizing him. I'm just saying this was your life before. Did whatever you wanted to, right? But now when you're old, Jesus says there's going to be something different, Peter. You're going to stretch out your hands. And look at this. He reverses every verb now. He says, another will gird you. And implied, another will carry you where you do not wish. And so Jesus now predicts a much different type of future for him. In fact, he takes all of the verbs here, he reverses them. He just totally spins them on their head. I told you before, all the verbs were imperfect, what Peter always did in the past. Jesus now switches to future indicatives. This is guaranteed, Peter. This is what's going to happen to you in the future. It's going to be the exact opposite of how it's always been. And the implication is this: Peter, you should just entrust your future to me instead of stop trying to control things. That's the idea. Okay, God has a plan for Peter's life. He says, another will gird you, not you, Peter. You're not going to be girding yourself. Another will carry you. It's not going to be you walking wherever you want to go, Peter. And another will carry you where you do not wish. And in fact, you're going to have to do something you're not going to enjoy too much. And one of the things that we're going to see here is that he's going to say that they're going to stretch you out. And that's just a euphemism for crucifixion. Jesus is predicting his death here. And so all of this, his life, his plans, his goals, his death are now scheduled and designed by someone else. It's amazing. Imagine Jesus showed up and said, hey, you are not in control of your life. Some of us would be like, that would be like a news flash. Oh, wow, man, bummer. But that's true of you as you sit here today. I mean, you don't need an appearance from Jesus to tell you these things. This is not your life to be lived in the way that you want it to be lived. This is your life to be lived in accordance with the design that you were created for. We've got a shift in our thinking here. Now, in the next phrase, John is going to tell us exactly what Jesus was telling Peter here. I already kind of alluded to it. But I think it also seems to predict or speak of Peter's manner of life going forward. He's not living his own life anymore. He's he's going to be living according to the purpose God has for him. And what was that? It was spelled out in those three imperatives, those commands we looked at last week: feed and tend his sheep. Now, having said that, John actually tells us exactly what Jesus meant here. He's going to give us the editorial comment. Remember, when John is writing this book, he's 60 years in the future from this event. He's writing the book of John in after AD 90. These events were recorded in 33 AD, so almost 60 years after the event. And probably over 20 years after Peter's death. Okay, so just to put that in perspective, as John is penning this, he's thinking back to this conversation, and then he's thinking about how this has played itself out in history. And so when Jesus describes Peter stretching out his hands, another girding him and carrying him where he does not wish, he's describing Peter's future death on the cross. And as I said, that stretching out your hands was a euphemistic way to say that you were crucified. So Jesus has been talking about Peter's life. Now he predicts his manner of death. And quite frankly, that must have been very jolting to Peter. And again, all of us know that we're going to die. But if someone were to tell you the way you were going to die, I mean, honestly, would some of y'all even want to know? Like if someone told me I was going to drown to death, I'd be like, oh, I wish you wouldn't have said that. Like we have ways that we would be so fearful. Peter has just been told he's going to be crucified, that his life is going to end in crucifixion. By the way, that thought terrified Peter so greatly just a few weeks before that what did he do around a coal of fires? He denied ever knowing Jesus Christ. So he didn't want to share in that. Peter is now told that he's going to die by crucifixion. It's interesting because Jesus tells Paul something very similar. In Acts 9:15, in Paul's conversion account, the Lord is speaking to Ananias. He said to Ananias, "Go, for he," Saul or Paul, "is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel." And then notice what he says: "For I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake." Isn't that an amazing thing? You think you're recruiting somebody. You would look at what Jesus says to Peter and Paul here, and you'd say, Jesus was a terrible recruiter, right? He's going to tell them all the bad things they're going to have to endure. Like, you don't do that when you're recruiting someone, right? You get them to sign on the line, and then later on they can find out all the bad things that will happen to them. You're not going to tell them. Jesus doesn't do that. He cast it out right at the beginning. You know, there was an old tract that used to be given out years ago, and I am careful because I don't want to come off too critical of anything, but the concept is God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. Well, try telling that to Peter right now. It doesn't sound too wonderful. Try telling that to Paul. It doesn't sound too exciting. It sounds like, wow, this is going to be terrible. And so guess what? At some level, when Jesus calls Peter to follow him, he's not saying follow him because I'm just going to keep giving you cotton candy, ice cream, and goodies your entire life. So there's got to be something more in that motivation to follow Jesus than just getting what you want. See, that's the problem with our culture. That's the problem with many of our churches. That's the problem with our thinking sometimes, is we view Jesus up there as the eternal vending machine. And if we rub him the right way and throw enough coins in there and you know, bump up against him, he's going to kick out some cookies. And that is totally foreign. Again, who's the focus there? That is all about you and your life. You're still trying to gird yourself. You're still trying to walk where you want to walk. You're still trying to do what you want to do. And now all of a sudden you've just added Jesus to the equation to help you get what you want. I'm sorry, that's not biblical Christianity. In fact, you're called to a higher plane than that. That is a low plane. That's just how your unbelieving neighbor thinks of Jesus. You know, your unbelieving neighbor prays to Jesus too when they need something from the vending machine of life. That's not the standard by which we're going by. We're called to a much higher standard. It is simply this, not, Lord, this is what I'm going to do today, bless me. It's like, Lord, I'm available to do what you want to do today. What is that? And that's the whole mindset shift when we look at it here. Now, history does tell us that Peter was crucified upside down. because as he told his executioners, he felt unworthy to die in the same exact manner as his Lord. Now that's an amazing statement. I don't want to burst anyone's bubble. History does testify that Peter was crucified, and he was crucified in Rome. There's actually only one ancient source that says he was crucified upside down, and everyone's repeated it since. So it's not super strong evidence, but it's possible. It does sound like Peter, right? It kind of sounds like something Peter would do. So I'm okay mentioning it, but just know in terms of historical, what would you call it, accuracy, it may not be completely accurate. There's one source that does record that. But either way, Peter is crucified just like Jesus predicted here. And then notice also this, and we've said this already, but Peter's death is going to glorify God, meaning, again, glorify means to declare his amazing reputation. Glorify means that I'm speaking well of somebody. That's what it means, right? In the Greek, it was like blowing a kiss to an inferior. You're speaking well of them. You're declaring their reputation. And so Peter's death is going to glorify God. And this is a very significant point. Paul brings it out and words it very well in Philippians 1, 20 through 21. He says, according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Now, it's interesting because Jesus has just predicted Peter's death. And then he follows up with this command, follow me. And I don't know about you, but if someone just told me you're going to die by following me, so follow me, I'd be like, can I think about that can I have a couple weeks to pray about that? You know, is that really the route I want to take? But Jesus just simply tells him, follow you. And by the way, when you follow Jesus, everything goes well. Right? I mean, everything works out. If you follow Jesus, you're not going to have any trials, right? So if you're going through trials right now, it's because it's your problem. You're not following Jesus. Hopefully you understand. Tongue in cheek here, right? I'm being very sarcastic. It's interesting that many of us we know these things, right? We know a lot of these things. We just need to be reminded of these things when we're actually in the muck and the mire, when we're in the cow dung up to our knees of life. Like, these are the reminders that we need. And we need to remind ourselves that our lives are not about our comfort. Our lives are about his glory. Those are two different, radically different approaches to life. And if you are of the mind that your life is about your comfort, you're going to be very frustrated with life. You're going to be very disillusioned with life. This is why people are miserable. You've met those people, right? Every word out of their mouth is negative. Every word out of their mouth is critical. They couldn't have a positive conversation if they tried, because their life is about their comfort. It's not about God's glory. See, we've got to decide for ourselves, and it's better to decide when bullets aren't flying at your head, so to speak. When you're not in the midst of a crazy trial, it's really hard sometimes to think there. We're literally trying to keep our head above water so we're not drowning. But when it's quiet, and when you can think about this truth, and when you can become convinced of this truth, this is going to be an anchor for your soul. This is going to be an anchor for you in anything that you go through in life. And those are the times these decisions need to be made. You are simply this: as you sit there today as a believer in Jesus Christ, you are a vessel designed for God's glory. Can you wrap your head around that? Can we wrap our head around that when we're going through trials? Can we wrap our head around that when life is difficult, when there's a challenging situation that's going on? You are not there for yourself, you're there for him. You are a vessel designed for God's glory. And this is one of those things that Peter needs to understand. Now, Jesus is just going to tell him flat out, follow me. It means to attend to, it means to accompany, it means to follow someone with an emphasis on being together, okay? Not just following me from afar, but following me so that you're close enough to enjoy me is kind of the implication, I would say. Now, this is the fourth command that Jesus has given Peter in this brief interaction. The first three is he told him what to do for others. Feed my lambs, right? Tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Now he's going to give one to how he should continue to relate to Jesus. How do you relate to others? How do you relate to Jesus? These are the 4 commands that Peter's been given. And thankfully for Peter, his marching orders for Jesus remains the same. Jesus doesn't say now, okay, now I need you to do something different you've never done before. Peter's been following Jesus the last 3 years. And the idea is, hey, just continue following Jesus today. And then guess what happens when you wake up tomorrow? Any guesses? Just keep continuing to follow Jesus. And that's his marching orders, right? That's what he's designed to do. That's what he's designed to be going forward. And there's some urgency in the response here. It's a present imperative. It's a command, okay? And Jesus doesn't want Peter thinking about this. He wants him responding immediately to this command, this exhortation, if you will. Now, when you know Peter's life, you know that there are other times in his life, in the Gospels, prior to his denial, where he was following Jesus pretty well. But he was following him, and then he got distracted at least twice. So let me just mention those. We looked at both of these over the course of the study. But if you remember back in Luke 5, there was this miraculous catch of fish. And Peter was listening to Jesus. He was following Jesus. He was there for his teaching. Remember, Jesus, they hadn't caught anything. Jesus said, cast the net over there. Peter's like, all right, if you tell us to. They did it, miraculous catch of fish. And then Peter gets distracted. What does he do? He takes his eyes off the Lord, and he puts them on himself. That's what he does in Luke 5. Later, when he walked on the sea, Peter took his eyes off the Lord, and he put them on what? His circumstances, the wind and the waves. Here in our passage this morning, we're going to see Peter get distracted again. But he's not going to get distracted by himself. He's not going to get distracted by the winds and the waves. He's going to get distracted by someone else. All of these areas in life where you and I can become distracted. He's once again going to take his eyes off the Lord, put it on someone else. And so Jesus' messaging to Peter here is super clear. It's a one-on-one message requiring a one-on-one response. This isn't how Peter proceeds. In fact, he gets distracted, and I put horizontally. Right now, he's looking around, and this is exactly what we're going to see in verse 20. He turns around. Okay, right there, that was like bad directional navigation. That's like me trying to find my way in a city I don't know. Peter turns around. He saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, but Lord, what about this man? Okay, he gets distracted. He looks at John here, and we'll talk about this. But right at this moment, I don't know, they're walking along or they're having a conversation, and Peter probably just kind of turns around. He sees John there. This real simple, real easy thing that can happen in any conversation. But we see that John identifies himself in 2 ways. The disciple whom Jesus loved. Again, John uses the Greek word agapao. He said this about himself a few times in the book, stressing the quality of Jesus' intentional love for him, right? We've talked about how that's in the imperfect tense. Jesus kept on loving John. He continually always loved John in a way that was best for John. But he also identifies himself as the one who had leaned on Jesus' breast during supper, and we saw that recorded in John 13. Now, Peter seeing him and just having an intensely personal conversation with Jesus, Peter wondered out loud what would become of John. Now, you can understand that, okay? Peter probably thinks Jesus is getting ready to go around the room and like, oh, what about him? And what about him? And what about, let's find out what everyone's doing, kind of deal. It could have been that. We really don't know why Peter asked about John. The text simply does not give us his motivation. We just don't know. But as you can imagine with commentators and Bible teachers, a lot of people have speculation and have speculated over the years as to why he does this. Now, Peter's not the only Christian that's wanted to know the will of God for another Christian. I mean, let's be honest. We've seen that a few times over the last, well, not over the last couple, we haven't seen it over the last 1,000 years, but we have historically, right? So this happens a lot. But you can imagine there's a lot of speculations. Let me just give you a couple of the speculations. As a question, was Peter trying to deflect Jesus' attention from himself because he was uncomfortable with the topic and direction of the conversation? Maybe. I mean, somebody tells you you're fixing to die, like you might be like, oh man, can I get you some more chips? Like you change the direction of the conversation. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe Peter was just curious about John's future purpose or fate. Maybe Peter actually had a concern for John's martyrdom. Man, if that's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to John? I love this guy. He's a partner in my business. I'm very close to him. We don't know. Again, we just don't know. Either way, for whatever reason, and this is the point, the issue in the moment was not that. That wasn't the issue, to find out what's going to happen to everybody. The issue was, what did Jesus have in store for Peter? That was the goal of the conversation. That was the focus of what Jesus was about. So Peter may have had great intentions. He may have had great motivations, a genuine concern about John, but at some point he needed to focus on what Jesus was saying to him about him. And we have this tendency to look at everyone else. You've heard the phrase, sweep your own front porch. Probably heard that phrase. I don't know if that's an old phrase or it's new to me. I mean, within the last 10 years, it's probably been around forever, but sweep your own front porch. What's that mean? It means we have a generation of people, we have a humankind problem that my front porch can look like an absolute disaster, and I'm gonna point at the guy across the street and says, boy, their porch looks like terrible. And it's not even as bad as my front porch, but all I can see is everyone else's junk and mistakes and failures. We tend to not sweep our own front porch. And not that I agree with everything in this book, but many of you have probably heard of this book by Jordan Peterson called The 12 Rules for Life. And I love the subtitle. I never knew this until I looked it up. An antidote to chaos. It's kind of funny. But again, that's not a wholesale endorsement of the book. I'm just not saying, I'm just using a point from the book. One of the things that he says in his book, one of his 12 rules for life, is real simple: clean your room. And I love that. Because you know what he's saying? He's saying to a generation of people who are so focused on all the problems in the world, we're going to solve world hunger, we're going to solve this, we're going to solve that, and they can't even clean their room. Like, get that right first before you go try to clean up the world. That's the point. And so Peter's in a situation here, like many of us are. He needs to just worry about what Jesus is calling him to do for a second. I mean, at least consider it for a little bit longer than just the same conversation where he gets distracted. He's now focused on John. And again, I don't want to be too hard on Peter, but Jesus is going to tell him, like, what's that to you? That's exactly what he's going to say to Peter. What does that have to do with you? What does what going on with John have to do with you? And by the way, I think we could ask ourselves the same exact question today. What is what's going on with you today have anything to do with your spouse ultimately? What does it have to do with your boss, your coworkers? Just run it down the line of every relationship you have, because as you sit there today as a believer in Jesus Christ, you have been placed in Jesus Christ. You've been given every spiritual blessing that you have in Christ. You have resources of Jesus Christ at your disposal to handle any situation that you're in right now. You got them. They're yours. The question is, can you enjoy what you've got? Can you begin to take advantage of what you got? The problem with us is, my spouse is a little cantankerous, and it's all her fault that I'm responding in the flesh to everything. It's all her fault that I'm the one. And we used to joke, Carrie, my wife is a very sweet woman, but she also knows how to, slice my bread and butter it too, when I'm getting a little too big for my britches, if you want to say it that way. And I remember one time in an argument one time, I actually told her, I'm so embarrassed to admit this, but I actually told her, no, if you wouldn't do this, then I wouldn't respond this way. And she told me one time, she said, well, it sounds like if you had a different wife, you'd be perfect. And man, that nailed me. I mean, that cut, I was like, that is what I'm saying, but I don't mean that. I'm just trying to pass the buck to you. But she nailed me. She's right. And she did it lovingly, by the way, but it really hit me hard. It's like, no, she's right. She's not the problem. I'm the problem. My response is the problem. She's not the problem. And so Peter needs to clean his own room, so to speak. Too many of us are more focused on what other believers are doing or not doing, thinking or not thinking. We make all of our decisions based on that. Are you going to the Bible study this week? I don't know. Is so-and-so going? Who cares? That wasn't the question at all. You homeschooling your kids? Oh, well, what's so-and-so doing? Who cares? What are you doing before the Lord? See, this is how we do the same thing. We get distracted in the same way. Too many believers are more focused on how other believers are going about their Christian life, whether others are involved or not involved in ministry, whether others are engaged or not engaged in service. We're so focused on Oh, are you going to church tomorrow? Oh, if you're not going, I'm not going. Oh, are you going to that ministry? Oh, you're not going, I'm not going. Oh, did you hear about that ministry? I'm kind of interested. Oh, you're not interested? Oh, I'm not interested. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? We all do things like that in our lives, don't we? It's amazing the way that we need to train ourselves. We've got to train our eyes to be locked in on the Savior. We've got to train ourselves. This is not going to come naturally. We are a bunch of horizontal bumpers. I mean, we're like bumper cars. We just bump into horizontal things over and over, and they have a way of just redirecting us constantly. It's people. We can't even get out of our own way. It's us, and it's circumstances. And you just live life like a bumper car. And you think you're making progress, but last time I checked, the bumper cars are located in one spot in the amusement park. They don't go outside those four walls. They're not making progress at all. They're going different directions every once in a while. They're getting bumped. That's not the goal, right? There's a whole lot of difference between the bumper car section of the park and the parking lot section of the park. Because when I get out in the parking lot, guess where I'm going? Home. I'm going home as quickly as I can without getting in an accident in the parking lot. I'm not bumping people in the parking lot. In fact, I'm trying not to get bumped in the parking lot, which is almost a miracle sometimes. So it's not about what someone else is doing or not doing. It's about how you're responding to the Lord. Let's take this down to the brass tacks individual level. It's about you. And at the end of the day, it's you and Jesus Christ. Lucky you. He's awesome. He's awesome. Lucky you. You and Jesus Christ, this is what it's all about. You know, Colossians 3, Paul says it this way. Whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. Some of us flip that verse. We say, whatever you do, do it heartily as unto men, not unto the Lord. Let me just please the person next to me. Let me just please the social circle I'm in. Scratch that. Don't get distracted. That's, the whole point. So this is, Jesus is going to tell Peter this, not so subtly. He's going to say, Peter, John's life has nothing to do with you. John's death has nothing to do with you. And this is how he's going to say it. There's, a picture of us, Peter, just peeking in, trying to watch somebody else, gawking. But Jesus said to him, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. What is that to you? It's got nothing to do with you, John. If, by the way, is a third-class condition, we'll talk about that in a second, as it relates to what John's going to say. But it just means maybe I will, maybe I won't. Maybe I will that he remains till I come. Maybe I won't will that he remains till I come. It's our typical conditional statement in English. It's not an assumed fact. Jesus is not saying this is going to happen. He's just saying, if I decide this, what's that to you, Peter? How does that even affect you? If that's what I decide. Again, John's going to reference in the second part of verse 23, Jesus didn't say that John would not die until his return. He gave a hypothetical, all right? And so hypothetically, if that were the case, he says, what's it to you? How does that involve you, Peter? And quite frankly, it doesn't involve you, Peter. It has nothing to do with you, Peter. So I just want you to look around the room. What is God going to do with one of the dear saints that catches your eye right now? Who knows? I'm rooting for them. Let's go, right? I'm rooting for them. But ultimately, what God does with them and how they respond to the Lord has nothing to do with me. It breaks my heart when I hear of a pastor falling in immorality and half the church never goes to church again because of what he did, because of the mistake he made. Or vice versa, where you've got a church where you've got a long-term pastor, and then as soon as they replace him with someone else, half the church leaves. Again, because it was all about doing what they did for someone else. That's not it at all. That is the key to a miserable life, unfortunately. And as I've said before, just remember, you're going to be at the judgment seat of Christ with Jesus one day all by yourself. I'm not going to be there with you. You're not going to be there with me. Your spouse is not going to be there with you. You're not going to be there with your spouse. Your children are not going to be there with you. Nobody is going to be there with you. It's you and Jesus. And guess what? We should start living life that way, as if it's just me and Jesus. And as we've said many times, living as if we had an audience of one, watching everything that we did, whether or not anyone else sees it or not. See, that's what it's all about. This is what Peter is missing here. We will not be able to, at that point, blame anybody else or point our fingers at anybody else. No one will be there to point at. It's you and Jesus. And again, lucky you. That's awesome. That's a good thing. That's something we should enjoy. Now, I love this quote. I tweaked it, but I got it from Our Daily Bread. He says, when I look at you, speaking a believer, when I look at somebody else, when I look at you, I'm either disappointed or envious most of the time. I mean, there's some positive. You can look positively at other people, but a lot of times I'm either disappointed with myself because I don't measure up, or envious because I don't measure up. When I look at me, I'm either totally disgusted or falsely confident. You ever springboard between that? You don't have to raise your hand, but you ever springboard between that in your life where you're just disgusted with yourself? And then sometimes you're a little too big for your britches. You're like, wow, I'm really good at that, really, whatever. But when I look at Jesus, I'm satisfied and I'm at rest. And if you agree with what's there right there, then why would you be occupied with anybody else besides Jesus Christ? If that's true, if that is a true sentiment that I've got written there, why would you be distracted by anything else except him, right? This is kind of the encouragement for us this morning. See, your response to trials, your response to difficulties, your response to opportunities in your life for good works, your response to your own emotional attitudes. There's oftentimes you can't control emotional response sometimes. It hits you. But what can you control? Your response to it, right? You can respond well to even emotional outbursts. How about your response to circumstances in your life? All of those things are going to be evaluated individually without consideration of anyone else. And the point is, let's not get distracted. I had a buddy of mine years ago. He really loved his mom, and his dad was a piece of work. And he used to always tell me, when my mom gets to the pearly gates and Peter finds out who she was married to, he's going to say, come on up here. I got a place up in the front of the line for you, because of who she had to deal with. But I mean, it's funny, but at the same time, you and I are going to be individually evaluated based on our response. It has nothing to do with someone else. And that's what we need to understand. Again, you're not going to be held accountable for someone else's giftings or shortcomings. You will not be compared with others by the Lord. I love that. You know, as much as we try, as parents even, as much as we try not to compare our kids with one another, we do it sometimes, don't we? It should sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, because every one of your kids are a blessing from God. They've been designed and wired and created uniquely by God, and we should be going around looking for ways to cheer on and applaud the way that God has designed them, because God's got a design for their life. And guess what? It might not meet your design for their life. So Peter, just, step back a little bit. Let the Peter in you step back. It's not about you girding yourself. It's about God fulfilling his plans and purposes in their life. We do that with everything in our life. We compare people just constantly. That's not fair. The Lord never does that. Do you know that when Jesus Christ sees you, he's not going to say, what's wrong with you? How come you weren't more like your older brother, older sister? How come you're not like him? How come you're not like her? No, that's not the standard at all. He's going to say, this is how I designed you, and this is what you lived. What was the struggle there? Why couldn't you live up to how I designed you? I didn't ask you to do more than you could. I gifted you. I skilled you. No, I'm reminded of the parable of the talents, although contextually this isn't probably the best place to go, but I like the principle here. Jesus, in Matthew 25:15, tells this story. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. I like that phrase. And immediately he went on a journey. And what does he say? The man with 5 talents gained 5 more. And what does he say? Well done, good and faithful servant. Love it. What does he say to the man with 2 talents who gained 2 more? Why didn't you get 5 talents like that guy? Is that what he says? No, he says the same exact thing to the man with 2 talents as he did to the 5, because he's not comparing them. He designed him with 2 talents. Guess what? He responded and produced or gained 2 more talents. And Jesus gives him the same message that he gave the 5-talent guy. Well done, good and faithful servant. See, you don't have to be the person sitting next to you. You don't have to be the person sitting across the room from you. You don't have to be your pastor. You don't have to be your missionary. You don't have to be your dad. You don't have to be your mom. You don't have to be. Who are you? How are you designed? And this is how we're going to be evaluated. I love this balance scale. There's God's design for your life. You know, in Ephesians 2:10, he says he's created you in Christ Jesus, right, to live out the good works that he's designed you for. That is God's design for your life. He's gifted you. He's wired you. He's prepared good works for you to walk in. And the question is, how did you execute that design? It's not were you like someone else. That is totally foreign to the concept of Christian living. And this is how we've got to start thinking. This is a very focused view. And so Jesus now has a very personal message for Peter. And he says this in verse 22. And I love this. This is how he finishes up. If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. The you here is emphatic. He's like, Peter, just stop. It's you. I'm talking to you. It's about you. It's about you and me. Don't worry about John's destiny. You worry about you, Peter, is kind of the idea. Follow, present active imperative, command. This is not something he wants Peter to think about. It's urgent, ongoing response. And in order to disciple others, this is very important. In order to disciple others, Peter's task, which is Peter's task and purpose going forward in life, he's got to first be a disciple himself. You're going to run out of gas. You're going to run out of juice if you think life is about ministry to others. I know that sounds like a false statement. Let me clarify. Your life is about fellowship with the one who died for you and rose again. That's what your life is about. Out of that can spring ministry for others, and that's usually how it's designed to work. Because without that, you don't have a source to continue in ministry to others. Because people are going to upset you, they're going to let you down, they're going to disappoint you, they're going to hurt you. And if you're functioning in your own strength, you know how you're going to respond? Well, forget this whole church thing. Forget these believers. Forget ministry. Forget this. I'm just going to go gird myself, walk myself, go anywhere I want to, and I'm going to go back to the way I used to do and think. And you can go back to a life of misery. That will be miserable for you because now you know the truth and now you're rejecting it to go back to something that's really less than what you had. And so the Christian life is about fellowship with Jesus Christ. Out of that should spring service to others. And you know what I love about this statement? I love about this, especially for those of you that don't have the cleanest, clearest past. Jesus is done with Peter's denials. He doesn't even bring it up. It's not about Peter's denials. His past is no longer an issue. You know what the issue is right now? Right now. That's the issue. Peter, what are you going to do right now? I could say that to you. Believer, what are you going to do right now? What does today look? Forget about tomorrow or yesterday. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction there. Forget about yesterday. Yeah, you let the Lord down. I get it. I did too. You've been a failure. I get it. So have I. You are unworthy to be involved in any kind of. I get it. Me too. Me too. Yesterday's a different discussion than what Jesus is having today with Peter. Today, Peter, right now, follow me. And guess what? When you wake up tomorrow, follow me. Start living in the present, in other words. Start living in the present, not worried about what's happened yesterday. And see, in verse 23, we're going to see that even many of the first century disciples missed the point. Verse 23 says, then this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? And so John corrects apparently a common misunderstanding in the first century. They took this story of Jesus and they said, oh yeah, John's not going to die until Jesus comes back. And so the older John got, the legend probably grew because all the apostles were dying and John's still alive here in the 90s, 60 years after this conversation. And they're probably just looking for John to stop breathing, right? Because as soon as he dies, we know Jesus is going to come back before then. So they're probably kind of rooting for Jesus or John's death in some ways. Like, because, man, Jesus is coming back before the guys die. And John, man, he's struggling getting up that hill. Man, we're getting close, guys. We're getting close or whatever. They missed the point, obviously. This is the irony. Who are they focused on? They're focused on John too. Just like Peter, they're still focused on someone else. Well, hopefully, and I think many of them did pick up the point, because many did follow Jesus and take the gospel to other places. But the point was they needed to respond to Jesus individually, not get distracted by someone else. Now, as John closes out his gospel, he wants us to know something. He wants us to know that he is a trustworthy eyewitness that recorded these things. He says, this is a disciple who testifies of these things and who wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. And I love that. John sticks with this legal terminology. He's a witness. He's an eyewitness giving accurate testimony. He wrote it down so that we could enjoy it and evaluate his testimony and see if we agree with it. And then that last verse there, and we covered this in detail a couple weeks ago, so I won't go back through this, but this idea that there are also many other things that Jesus did, that statement alone ought to blow your mind. We are talking about a Jewish carpenter who lived 33 years across the ocean, and here we are in Newnan, Georgia, over 2,000 years later, still talking about this man. And all we know is what we have recorded in the Bible. And John just blew our mind and said, you guys don't even know the half of it. Like, y'all don't even know it all. Just imagine if we knew it all. I mean, you'd be that much more convinced. Well, one day we will, hopefully, right? One day we will know it all. That would be such a blessing. And so in light of his closure to the book, I think it's the right way to say, be marveled by Jesus Christ. Be astonished and be amazed by your Savior. And understand that the amazement and the astonishment that you have today is going to be superseded when you see him. That is mind-blowing and so exciting. So I'm going to do something a little bit different this morning than I usually do, and don't feel like we're getting weird on you or anything. Typically when church ends, we come up, we give announcements, we talk to the person next to us, we're worried about lunch, we're all this kind of stuff. I'm going to close this with a word of prayer. Before I do that, I want to give you a minute of just silence. Silent reflection, silent contemplation. All I want you to think about is how amazing Jesus Christ is. I want you to think about what John just said. He just said, let's read it again. There are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Wow. Let me give you a minute. I'll just give you a quiet minute, and then I'll close this with a word of prayer. Lord, receive the praise that is coming from every one of our hearts this morning. You're amazing. And we want to live our lives in light of that truth every day, moment by moment. When we forget and we get distracted, remind us, Lord, bump us back to thinking accurately about everything going on. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.